The 1930s, a time of global unrest. Societies grappled with economic depression, political instability, and the scars of a war that had shattered their sense of security. Nationalism surged, fueled by resentment and economic hardship. Germany, burdened by crippling reparations and territorial losses, became fertile ground for extremist ideologies. The Nazi Party, led by Adolf Hitler, exploited this discontent, promising a return to greatness. The storm was brewing, and soon the world would be consumed by its fury. The roots of World War II ran deep, entangled in the unresolved tensions of the past. The Treaty of Versailles, intended to bring closure to World War I, had sown the seeds of resentment and instability. Germany, humiliated by its terms, yearned for a return to its former glory. Economic hardship further fueled the flames of discontent. The Great Depression had a devastating impact on nations worldwide. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party exploited this volatile mix of national humiliation and economic hardship. The seeds of conflict had taken root, and the world teetered on the brink of another devastating conflict. In Italy, Benito Mussolini had already established a fascist regime. Mussolini's Italy, driven by a thirst for empire, embarked on a campaign of military aggression, conquering Ethiopia in 1935. Inspired by Mussolini's success, right-wing movements gained traction across Europe. In Spain, a brutal civil war erupted in 1936. Hitler, emboldened by the inaction of the international community, continued his aggressive expansionist policies. In 1938, he annexed Austria into the Third Reich. The shadow of tyranny loomed large over Europe. On September 1, 1939, the world watched in horror as Hitler unleashed the full fury of the German war machine upon Poland. The invasion of Poland marked the beginning of World War II. Britain and France, bound by treaties to defend Poland's sovereignty, declared war on Germany on September 3rd. The world watched in horror as Hitler's forces swept through Poland. The Polish people fought bravely against overwhelming odds, but their valiant resistance was ultimately in vain. World War II had begun, a conflict born of unchecked aggression. It would be a war unlike any other, a total war that would blur the lines between battlefield and home front. The German invasion of Poland was swift and brutal. Hitler unleashed his blitzkrieg, a lightning war strategy designed to overwhelm the enemy with speed and firepower. German tanks, supported by dive bombers, raced across the Polish countryside. Polish forces, though courageous, were ill-equipped to counter the German onslaught. Cities and towns across Poland were bombed relentlessly. Despite the ferocity of the German attack, the Polish people fought back with determination. Within a month, Poland was forced to surrender. Following the fall of Poland, an unsettling quiet descended upon Western Europe. This period, known as the Phony War, was marked by a tense stalemate. France, heavily fortified behind the Maginot Line, adopted a defensive posture. Great Britain, its small army deployed to France, also stood by. Hitler, having secured his eastern border with the conquest of Poland, turned his attention to Scandinavia. The Phony War was a period of anticipation and uncertainty. Little did they know that the storm was about to break. On May 10, 1940, the silence of the Phony War was shattered by the roar of German tanks and aircraft. Hitler unleashed his blitzkrieg upon Western Europe, targeting France and the Low Countries. The German offensive was swift and devastating. Instead of attacking France directly through the heavily fortified Maginot Line, the Germans launched a surprise attack through the Ardennes forest. German tanks, commanded by Erwin Rommel, raced through the Ardennes. Within days, the German army had reached the English Channel. The fall of France seemed imminent. As the German army tightened its grip on the French coast, the British Expeditionary Force and a large number of French troops found themselves trapped. But in one of the most remarkable events of World War II, a desperate evacuation plan was put into action, known as the Miracle of Dunkirk. On May 26th, Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of Allied troops from the beaches of Dunkirk began. A hastily assembled fleet of over 800 vessels crossed the English Channel. The evacuation was a chaotic but heroic undertaking. Over the course of 9 days and nights, more than 338,000 Allied troops were evacuated from Dunkirk. Though the evacuation was a military retreat, it became a symbol of British resilience. With the fall of France, Great Britain stood alone against the Nazi war machine. Hitler launched a massive air campaign aimed at achieving air superiority over the English Channel. The Battle of Britain had begun. The German Luftwaffe targeted airfields, radar stations, and industrial centers. The RAF, though outnumbered, was ready for the challenge. British pilots, flying iconic aircraft like the Spitfire and Hurricane, engaged the Luftwaffe in fierce dogfights. Despite heavy losses, the RAF refused to break. As the Battle of Britain raged, German bombers turned their attention to British cities, unleashing a relentless bombing campaign known as the Blitz. Night after night, German bombers rained down destruction on London, Coventry, Liverpool, and other major cities. The Blitz was a campaign of terror designed to break the spirit of the British people. Despite the constant danger, the British people refused to be cowed. The spirit of defiance was strong. Neighbors helped each other, sharing what little they had. The Blitz revealed the resilience and courage of the British people. While the Battle of Britain raged, a conflict of even greater magnitude was brewing in the East. On June 22, 1941, Hitler unleashed Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. The initial German advance was swift and devastating. Caught off guard by the surprise attack, the Red Army was ill-prepared for the ferocity of the German Blitzkrieg. German tanks and aircraft tore through Soviet defenses. Millions of Soviet soldiers were killed or captured in the early months of the war. The fate of the Soviet Union hung precariously in the balance. As the German army swept across the Western Soviet Union, one city became a symbol of Soviet resistance: Leningrad. On September 8, 1941, German forces encircled the city, cutting off all land routes in and out. Thus began the Siege of Leningrad, a harrowing 872-day ordeal that would test the limits of human endurance and become a testament to the indomitable spirit of the human will to survive.
Trapped within the besieged city were nearly 3 million civilians, including hundreds of thousands of children. With supplies dwindling and winter approaching, the citizens of Leningrad faced a stark choice: resist or perish. They chose to resist.
Food became scarce, rationed to meager portions barely enough to sustain life. People ate anything they could find: wallpaper paste, leather belts, even pets. Disease, exacerbated by malnutrition and the bitter cold, swept through the city, claiming thousands of lives. Yet, Leningrad refused to break. Factories, working around the clock despite constant shelling and air raids, churned out weapons and ammunition for the defenders. Civilians, risking their lives, cleared rubble, fought fires, and tended to the wounded. The city's cultural institutions, though struggling to survive, continued to operate, offering a glimmer of hope and normalcy amidst the horrors of the siege. With Leningrad under siege, Hitler turned his attention to Moscow, the heart of the Soviet Union. In October 1941, as the first snows of winter began to fall, the Battle of Moscow commenced. Temperatures plummeted to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, freezing German equipment and crippling their supply lines. Soviet troops launched counteroffensives, pushing the Germans back from Moscow. The Battle of Moscow marked a turning point, shattering the myth of German invincibility. Stalingrad, a symphony of destruction. In the summer of 1942, Hitler aimed to capture Stalingrad.
The Battle of Stalingrad raged for over 6 months, becoming one of the bloodiest battles in history.
The battle began with a relentless German air bombardment. German and Soviet troops engaged in fierce street fighting. The fighting was brutal and unforgiving.
As winter set in, the battle intensified. Soviet troops refused to yield the city. German troops faced the bitter Russian winter.
In February 1943, the German Sixth Army surrendered. The Battle of Stalingrad was over, a decisive Soviet victory. Section 5. Partisan Resistance, Shadows in the Night. While the Red Army battled the Wehrmacht on the front lines, a different kind of resistance was taking shape behind enemy lines.
Across the occupied territories of the Soviet Union, ordinary citizens, fueled by patriotism and a burning hatred for the invaders, took up arms as partisans, waging a guerrilla war against the German occupiers.
Operating in secret, often under the cover of darkness, these partisan groups, comprised of men, women, and even children, disrupted German supply lines, ambushed patrols, and gathered intelligence for the Red Army. They were a constant thorn in the side of the German war machine, a shadowy force that sowed fear and uncertainty among the occupiers.
The partisan movement was particularly strong in the vast forests and swamps of Belorussia and Ukraine, where the dense terrain provided cover and concealment. Partisan leaders, often veterans of the Red Army or local communists, organized and trained their units, forging them into effective fighting forces.
The German occupiers, frustrated by the partisan attacks, responded with brutal reprisals, burning villages, executing suspected collaborators, and terrorizing the civilian population. But the partisan movement, fueled by the courage and determination of the Soviet people, continued to grow, becoming a crucial factor in the eventual Soviet victory. Section 6. Scorched Earth, the Retreat and its Toll. As the tide of war turned against Germany on the Eastern Front, the retreating German army adopted a ruthless strategy of scorched earth, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake.
Determined to deny the advancing Red Army any resources that could be used against them, the Germans systematically destroyed infrastructure, burned crops, and deported civilians. Villages and towns were razed to the ground, their inhabitants either forced to flee or deported as slave labor to Germany.
Factories, bridges, and railroads were blown up, leaving the landscape scarred and crippled. Fields of grain, once a source of sustenance for millions, were set ablaze, turning the breadbasket of the Soviet Union into a desolate wasteland.
The scorched earth policy had a devastating impact on the civilian population of the Soviet Union. Millions were left homeless, their lives uprooted by the war. Famine stalked the land as food became scarce and the once fertile fields lay barren. The human cost of the war, already staggering, continued to mount.
The retreat of the German army and the scorched earth policy were a testament to the brutality of the conflict on the Eastern Front. As war engulfed Europe, a different kind of storm was brewing in the East. Japan, with a proud samurai history, harbored ambitions of building an empire in Asia.
Driven by militaristic leaders, Japan embarked on a path of expansionism.
In the 1930s, Japan, facing economic hardship, looked to Southeast Asia for resources. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, exploiting the chaos of the Chinese Civil War.
The rape of Nanking became a symbol of Japanese brutality.
For the United States, the war in Europe seemed like a distant conflict, a European affair that did not directly threaten American interests.
But the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, shattered America's sense of security and galvanized the nation to action.
At 7:55 a.m., Japanese aircraft appeared in the skies above Pearl Harbor, the main U.S. naval base in the Pacific. The surprise attack caught the Americans completely off guard.
Waves of Japanese bombers and torpedo planes targeted the battleships moored at Battleship Row.
The USS Arizona exploded and sank, taking with it the lives of over 1,100 men.
The Day of Infamy had awakened a sleeping giant, and the United States prepared to enter the global conflict.
The Battle of Midway. Turning the tide in the Pacific. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. achieved a decisive victory in the Battle of Midway. Fought from June 4th to 7th, 1942, near Midway Atoll, it was a pivotal naval battle.
The battle was a clash of titans, a duel between the aircraft carriers of the two most powerful navies. The outcome hinged on intelligence, strategy, and a bit of luck.
American codebreakers intercepted Japanese communications, giving Admiral Nimitz valuable information. American dive bombers caught Japanese carriers in a vulnerable position. The attack was swift and devastating.
3 Japanese carriers were engulfed in flames. A 4th carrier, the Hiryu, was sunk later that day.
The Battle of Midway was a resounding victory, shifting the balance of naval power in the Pacific. Section 5. Kamikaze, Desperate Measures of a Failing Empire. As the tide of war turned against Japan, the military resorted to kamikaze pilots, young men on suicide missions, crashing their planes into Allied ships. This tactic, born of desperation and fueled by devotion to the emperor, reflected the growing desperation of the Japanese military.
The first kamikaze attacks occurred in October 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Initially, the kamikaze attacks shocked American sailors who had never encountered such a tactic before.
But as the attacks increased, they became a serious threat, sinking or damaging dozens of Allied ships. The kamikaze attacks, though effective at times, ultimately failed to alter the course of the war. They were a desperate measure of a failing empire, a testament to the human cost of fanaticism. Section 6. The Price of Victory. Okinawa, a harbinger of things to come. In the spring of 1945, the United States launched its final major offensive in the Pacific, the invasion of Okinawa. The Battle of Okinawa, which raged for 82 days, was one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. A horrific preview of the carnage that might await if the Allies were forced to invade Japan. The Japanese, determined to defend their homeland, had fortified Okinawa extensively. They hoped to make the invasion so costly that the United States would negotiate peace. The Battle of Okinawa, though a victory for the United States, came at a terrible cost. Over 12,500 American soldiers were killed and over 36,000 wounded. World War II was not just fought on battlefields. Across Nazi-occupied Europe, a hidden war raged: the resistance. Ordinary men and women rose up against Nazi tyranny in acts of extraordinary courage. The resistance took many forms, from gathering intelligence to sabotaging German operations. In France, the Maquis disrupted German supply lines, aiding the Allied invasion on D-Day. The resistance fighters faced incredible dangers, constantly hunted by the Gestapo. The resistance movements across Europe played a vital role in the Allied victory. In the shadowy world of intelligence gathering, a silent battle raged throughout World War II, the battle to crack the enemy's codes. At Bletchley Park, a stately manor house in England, a brilliant team of mathematicians, linguists, and cryptographers toiled tirelessly to break the German Enigma code.
The Enigma machine, a complex electromechanical device used by the Germans to encrypt their military communications, was considered unbreakable. Its intricate system of rotors and wiring could generate millions of possible combinations, making it nearly impossible to decipher intercepted messages.
At Bletchley Park, a team led by the brilliant mathematician Alan Turing worked day and night to break the Enigma code. They faced a daunting task, requiring not only exceptional intellectual ability, but also perseverance and a touch of inspiration.
The breakthrough came with the development of Colossus, the world's first programmable electronic computer. Colossus, using complex algorithms, was able to rapidly analyze intercepted German messages, searching for patterns and weaknesses in the Enigma encryption.
The intelligence gleaned from breaking the Enigma code proved invaluable to the Allied war effort. It provided crucial insights into German troop movements, battle plans, and supply lines, giving the Allies a significant strategic advantage. In the spring of 1943, the Jewish inhabitants of the Warsaw Ghetto, a walled-off section of the Polish capital where the Nazis had herded hundreds of thousands of Jews, rose up in arms against their oppressors.
The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, a desperate and ultimately doomed rebellion, stands as a testament to the indomitable spirit of the human will to resist even in the face of overwhelming odds.
By 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto had become a symbol of Nazi barbarity. Hundreds of thousands of Jews had been deported to extermination camps, and those who remained faced starvation, disease, and the constant threat of deportation. But even in these desperate circumstances, the spirit of resistance flickered.
Armed with a meager arsenal of pistols, rifles, and homemade explosives, the Jewish resistance fighters, led by young men and women who had known nothing but oppression their entire lives, fought back against the heavily armed German forces.
The uprising lasted for nearly a month, a David versus Goliath struggle that captured the world's attention. Though outgunned and outnumbered, the Jewish fighters fought with incredible courage and determination, inflicting surprising casualties on the Germans. World War II was a total war, a conflict that blurred the lines between the battlefield and the home front. While soldiers fought on distant shores, civilians across the globe found themselves thrust into extraordinary circumstances, their lives irrevocably altered by the global conflict.
They endured hardship, displayed remarkable resilience, and often performed acts of quiet heroism that would shape the course of the war and the world that emerged from its ashes.
With millions of men away fighting, women stepped into traditionally male roles, working in factories, shipyards, and on farms, producing the weapons, ammunition, and supplies needed to sustain the war effort. They became the backbone of the home front, keeping economies afloat and demonstrating their mettle in the face of adversity.
Children, too, played their part. They collected scrap metal, tended victory gardens, and boosted morale with their youthful enthusiasm. They endured rationing blackouts and the constant fear of air raids, their childhoods overshadowed by the conflict.
Families coped with the loss of loved ones, sent care packages to soldiers fighting far from home, and clung to hope that the war would soon end. They opened their homes to refugees, shared their meager rations, and found strength in their communities. In the darkest chapter of human history, when the Nazi regime implemented its genocidal plan to exterminate the Jews of Europe, there were individuals who risked their own lives to save others. These were the rescuers, ordinary people from all walks of life who stood up against the tide of hatred and barbarity, offering shelter, protection, and hope to those targeted for extermination.
Some rescuers were motivated by religious convictions, seeing it as their moral duty to help those in need. Others were driven by a sense of humanity, unable to stand idly by while others suffered. They opened their homes, shared their meager rations, and provided false papers, knowing that discovery meant certain death.
In Nazi-occupied Poland, where the penalty for aiding Jews was death, individuals and families sheltered Jews in attics, basements, and secret rooms, living in constant fear of discovery. In Denmark, an entire nation mobilized to smuggle their Jewish population to safety in neutral Sweden.
The rescuers were a beacon of hope in a world consumed by darkness, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. They remind us that even in the face of unimaginable evil, individuals can make a difference, and that acts of kindness and bravery can shine a light in the darkest of times.
A global tapestry of valor, soldiers from distant lands. World War II was a truly global conflict.
Millions of soldiers from colonies and nations across the globe were drawn into the maelstrom. These soldiers fought with courage and distinction.
From the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of Burma, from the mountains of Italy to the islands of the Pacific, these soldiers served in diverse theaters of war, enduring hardship and displaying remarkable bravery.
They served in segregated units, often relegated to support roles, yet their contributions were essential. Their stories, often untold and forgotten, deserve to be remembered.
The forgotten front African soldiers in the European theater. While the North African campaign is often remembered for the clash between British and German forces, it was also a battleground where soldiers from French colonies in Africa played a significant role.
Hundreds of thousands of soldiers from Senegal, Algeria, Morocco, and other African colonies fought for France, their contributions often overshadowed by the larger narrative of the war. These soldiers, known as tirailleurs sénégalais, fought with courage and distinction in some of the toughest battles of the North African campaign, including the Battle of Monte Cassino in Italy, where they played a crucial role in breaking through the German Gustav line.
Their sacrifices helped to pave the way for the eventual Allied victory in Italy. Despite their service and sacrifice, these African soldiers faced discrimination and prejudice from their French comrades and commanders.
They were often relegated to menial tasks, denied promotions, and paid less than their white counterparts. After the war, their contributions were often downplayed or ignored, their sacrifices forgotten. It is only in recent years that their stories have begun to be told, their bravery acknowledged, and their sacrifices honored.
Empires at war, colonies in conflict, the Pacific and beyond. The Pacific theater of World War II was not simply a conflict between Japan and the United States. It was also a battleground where the imperial ambitions of European powers collided with the rising tide of nationalism in their colonies.
Soldiers from British India, the Dutch East Indies, and French Indochina were drawn into the conflict. The Japanese invasion shattered the illusion of European invincibility.
British, Indian, and Australian troops fought bravely, but were often outmaneuvered. The fall of Singapore was a humiliating defeat and a turning point.
The Japanese occupation brought hardships but also awakened nationalism, a desire for self-determination that would eventually lead to the end of colonial rule.
Section 4. The Burma Campaign. Forgotten battles, unwavering courage. The Burma Campaign, fought in the jungles and mountains of Southeast Asia, was one of the longest and most grueling campaigns of World War II. British, Indian, and African troops, along with American and Chinese forces, battled the Japanese in a harsh and unforgiving environment, where disease, heat exhaustion, and monsoonal rains were as formidable as the enemy.
The Burma Campaign is often referred to as the Forgotten War because it received relatively little attention compared to the fighting in Europe and the Pacific. Yet, the soldiers who fought there endured some of the most brutal conditions of the entire war, facing a determined enemy and a hostile environment.
The campaign was marked by a series of offensives and counteroffensives, as both sides fought for control of key roads, rivers, and supply lines. The fighting was often hand-to-hand, fought in dense jungles where visibility was limited, and the element of surprise was crucial.
Despite the hardships they faced, the soldiers of the Burma Campaign exhibited extraordinary courage, resilience, and ingenuity. They fought on, driven by a sense of duty, camaraderie, and a determination to defeat a formidable enemy.
Section 6. The Navajo Code. Talkers, an unbreakable bond. Among the most famous code talkers were the Navajo code talkers, recruited from the Navajo Nation in the American Southwest. The Navajo language, with its complex grammar and tonal qualities, proved particularly difficult for the Japanese to decipher. The Navajo code talkers became an invaluable asset to the U.S. Marine Corps in the Pacific Theater.
The Navajo code talkers served with distinction in some of the fiercest battles of the Pacific War, including Iwo Jima and Okinawa. They relayed crucial messages about troop movements, enemy positions, and tactical maneuvers, often under intense enemy fire. Their speed and accuracy proved vital in coordinating assaults, calling in artillery strikes, and evacuating wounded soldiers.
The Navajo Code. Talker's code was never broken by the Japanese. Their contributions were essential to the American victory in the Pacific, saving countless lives and shortening the war. After the war, their service remained largely classified for decades.
It was not until 1968 that the Navajo code talkers' story was finally declassified and their contributions to the war effort were publicly acknowledged. Today, the Navajo code talkers are celebrated as American heroes, their courage, ingenuity, and patriotism serving as an inspiration to future generations.
As the dust settled on the battlefields of World War II, the world lay in ruins. Entire cities reduced to rubble, landscapes scorched and desolate.
Yet from the ashes emerged a new world order, grappling with profound changes. The war reshaped the geopolitical map, redrawing boundaries.
The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, their rivalry shaping the decades to come. Europe lay devastated, its people struggling to rebuild their lives. The physical scars of World War II may have faded with time, but the war's psychological and emotional impact continued to reverberate across generations.
For those who had witnessed the horrors of the Holocaust, the memories remained a haunting presence.
The war also left its mark on the cultural landscape, inspiring a wave of literature, film, and art.
Filmmakers, too, turned their lenses on the war, creating powerful cinematic portrayals of the conflict.
Amidst the devastation and loss, World War II revealed extraordinary resilience and compassion within the human spirit. From bombed-out cities to prisoner-of-war camps, individuals found ways to resist, rebuild, and hold on to hope.
Resistance fighters, codebreakers, and citizens risked their lives, showing courage and compassion. Their legacy inspires us to cherish peace, fight for justice, and remember their sacrifices.
World War II stands as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked aggression and intolerance. The lessons learned from this conflict guide us in shaping a more peaceful world.
The war taught us the importance of international cooperation and strong multilateral institutions. The United Nations remains a vital forum for dialogue and diplomacy.
The horrors of the Holocaust remind us of the dangers of unchecked hatred. Education and remembrance are essential to preventing future atrocities.
World War II highlighted the importance of protecting human rights and dignity. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights stands as a testament to this commitment.
As we navigate the 21st century, the lessons of World War II remain relevant. By upholding peace, justice, and human dignity, we secure a brighter future.